If you look at some of the early versions of the Viking imagery of the face on Mars, it's got lateral stripes on both sides of the platform on which the face is lying. That told me that there was potentially an Egyptian connection. Then you fast forward the film and you get into people like Vladimir Ivinsky, who was a Russian researcher, who completely separately in 1984 published in Soviet Life magazine a chronology of his investigation of Cydonia, and he wound up calling the face on Mars the Martian Sphinx. More fast forward to film. As part of my research, when Errol Torren came on board the investigation, we realized one day that there was exquisite mathematical linkage between the physical placement of the ruins on Mars and the physical placement of the ruins in Egypt. In fact, if I remember this correctly now, the cosine of one was equivalent to the sine of the other. And the odds of that happening were like 7,000 to 1. In other words, each special place with a sphinx and pyramids on two separate planets knew the other's location to within one part in 7,000. And that's just not in the cards. That's not, as George Murray says, I don't believe in coincidence. Well, George is right. This cannot be coincidental. The more you delve into Egyptian history, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Egyptian architecture, all of the stuff Egyptian, which by the way is what the Masons are basing their stuff off of, you find this incredible subliminal connection to Mars. Now, when I'm looking at a departed civilization on another planet, where I have no ground truth, if I can on this planet find linkages where I might have ground truth, that makes me pay attention. Well, bottom line, there appeared to be, both in the mythos, in the architecture, in the math, the geometry, at all levels, some profound, deep connection between the monuments of Mars and the monuments of Earth, specifically in Egypt. What I called in monuments the terrestrial connection. And you don't have to have me go into it now, because you can go to the books and read all about it, where we document it with pictures and equations and all that. However, that got me looking and really paying attention to a few little blips that in Egypt there may in fact be records, current extant records, a hint of a former high-tech civilization which in the model might have either gone to Mars and built the stuff we were seeing, although now I don't think that's the case, there's too much stuff there, or in fact have been back, what do they call that, blowback, although that's a negative term, where, well, not back engineered, but in other words, the civilization on Mars that we see in ruins could have sent refugees or colonists or whatever to Earth, and then you would have an independent development where they would develop high civilization, and you might see on Earth the record of that ancestry reflected in the monuments. One case in particular was what we see on the screen. This is Abydos, which by the way is a very critical planet in the whole Stargate mythology around the very popular television show. And that raises the question, what do those folks know and when do they know it? This is Abydos. What's striking is this is the temple of Seti I, who was one of the Renaissance pharaohs. He was kind of like in the middle part of Egyptian history about 1,500 years ago. He was a Renaissance guy. He basically was looking back to the beginnings of his culture, his civilization, and he had the power and the money and the ability to order his guys to basically find the good stuff and build monuments affirming what great guys those old original founders of Egyptian culture were. And he built this temple at Abydos. Now, the thing that's striking to me is when you look at the facade of this, what does it look like to you? It looks to me modern. It doesn't look ancient. Mm-hmm. In fact, it looks really, really modern. In fact, I'll tell you what it looks like. It's a big, massive, five-sided building on the other side of the Potomac called the Pentagon. If you look at the Pentagon at ground level, it looks like this, including the columns, which are made out of concrete. These are made out of stone. When you go inside, that's where the real surprise is, because inside, up on the lintels, one in particular that are holding up the roof, you see this amazing frieze of what looks initially like hieroglyphs, but in fact appear to be high-tech stuff. Like, here's a helicopter, here's a tank, here's an obvious anti-gravity spacecraft with tail, here's a land speeder. I mean, this looks exactly like Luke's land speeder from Star Wars, all right? And you've got some other things that look more like iconography, maybe letters, maybe some kind of hieroglyphics. They don't look Egyptian. And what I did was to simply lay out the comparisons right here. Now, anybody who looks at this says, oh my God, you mean the Egyptians had battle tanks and Cobra helicopters? No, that's not what we're saying. What I'm saying is that here's the Abrams tank compared to the tank here. What I'm saying is that this ancient culture, spearheaded by Seti I, looking back through his own sacred records, his own sacred texts, his documentation of what is called in the Egyptian the first time, which is a chronicle of some extraordinary era that occurred before then contemporary Egyptian civilization, that he was memorializing the amazing guys that did and could build and preserve this stuff. And so what I think Seti was doing, Seti I, was he was basically building a museum to memorialize the technology from the time that came before, from the first time. The Shensu Hor, the followers of Horus, who are this lineal priesthood that kept track. And if you look at Manetho's chronology, his calendar, you see these enormous swaths of time that conventional Egyptologists dismiss as, silly, misidentification of lunar cycles for years and stuff like that. But you're talking periods of time that equal like 10, 20, 30,000 years in a chunk. If you run that whole clock backward, this period of time could in fact have been contemporaneous with whoever built what we're seeing on Mars. And the anchoring piece of real science is that when you look at the Giza Plateau, when you look at the pyramids from the top down, look at Bavall and Hancock's reconstruction that the stars in the belt of Orion mimic the pyramid placement at Giza. And you look at how those pyramids are aligned almost, but not exactly, on due north. If you take a very simple clock, which is the plate tectonics in standard geology now, and you unwind that clock of the plate rotation of Africa due to the physics of the planet underneath Giza, it turns out that the architecture of the Giza Plateau and the time frame for whoever built Sidonia is exactly the same, 250,000 years.
Okay.
Which means
we have 28 minutes, just so you